Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks, Tricia. Good to be here.
Thank you for being here. Today we have author Joel McKay. He is a fantasy and dark fantasy horror author, and I can't wait to jump into your books. They all look super exciting, super thrilling, adventurous, and fast-paced. So where do you want to start?
I have no idea. I'm hoping that they're adventurous and fast-paced and that people like them. But yeah, dive in wherever you want. We can dive in with the first one, or we can dive in with the latest one. What do you advise?
I would love to hear about your Dungeoneers. I think that's your latest release, right?
It is. Yeah, yeah. So the Dungeoneers and the Treasure of Roan is me delivering on a promise that I had to my 12-year-old self to write a fantasy book one day, and struggled for years and years and years to find the story and to have the skills in the craft to do it. And then finally did it. And so it is a young adult fantasy action and adventure, and very much in the vein of sort of Dungeons and Dragons paperback novels from the 80s and 90s. So it is fun, lighthearted, and full of different types of treasure and adventure and monsters and characters with questionable moral backing. So it's its own thing.
Yeah, I read the little blurb from the back, and you had me at goblins. So
Yeah, it's funny too because there's goblins, but not your typical goblins, and so I'm kind of poking fun at goblins and turning them into more than just your regular goblins throughout the book. And some of the reviews have picked up on how much they like the goblins, which was not something I was expecting in this book. I mean, I loved how that all turned out with a lot of humor. But yeah, goblins, there you go. Some people love them, and I'm doing something slightly different here with them.
oh, interesting. I'll have to read it to find out. Well, set me up. Tell me about the character of the world, how you created them.
Yeah, so well, how this book started actually was I was on a writing retreat in a place a couple of hours from here in northern British Columbia called the Robson Valley. It's very remote. It's right between the Rocky Mountains and the Caribou Mountains. And I was writing horror that weekend, and I had this vision in my head of a thief just running up a snowy mountainside and disappearing into a cave and looking over his shoulder before he did. And it just stuck in my head what that image was. And for a couple of years, I tried to write it. I tried to figure out what it was. What was he after? What was he fleeing? And then eventually he became Wincott, which was this a past his prime thief who's been thrown out of all the local towns because nobody can put up with him anymore. And he finds himself down in this wintry valley, and he escapes a band of goblins that he tried to rob unsuccessfully into this abandoned city called Roan. And there he runs into his estranged son, Sish, and the two of them don't like one another. And it's evident right from the get-go, but they're kind of stuck. And Sish is there trying to find his way into this abandoned city to go after the fabled treasure of Roan. And his own story is that he had, and you find this out early on in the novel, he had abandoned his group of his party of adventurers, if you will, who are known as the Dungeoneers, who are kind of a bunch of do-gooders who go around and explore dungeons and try and get rid of evil monsters to make the world safer. And he decided to sort of join them on their quest to Roan and then abandon them to get the treasure for himself because he really doesn't care about their altruistic goals. So therein lies The immediate conflict is these two thieves who don't like each other, father and son, stuck at the entrance of the city. One wants the treasure, one just wants to survive the goblins. And the older one, who's looking to survive, actually knows how to get into the city. And so from there, the adventure sort of starts to take place. And it is a classic dungeon tale in that pretty much the entire thing takes place in the dungeon in Rome. And so it is very much modeled after sort of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign or dungeoneering from video games, that type of thing, and the types of tropes that pop up when you're playing those games or reading books of that type. So yeah, it's fun, it's easy, it's young adult, and it definitely leans into unpacking that relationship between father and son.
Well, and it sounds like maybe it's upper YA too, because I mean,
Yeah,
obviously this main character Sis is, or
Sish.
Sish is, able to be alone and on his own and make decisions
It
about
is.
questionable decisions about, who he's using to get where he wants to go.
Yeah, yeah, it's borderline young adult, not young adult. So upper would probably be the way to describe it. And ultimately why it landed in that category was because it is a coming of age story about it in many ways about this young thief who's coming to terms with his relationship as with his father, his relationship with other people as he enters adulthood. And so for me, when I looked at the book, because when I wrote it, I didn't write it as a young adult. I just wrote it as a fantasy novel. And then when I went through it afterwards, I was like, yeah, actually, it does have that YA bent to it. I think that is kind of your audience. That's what I was intending the audience to be. But make no mistake about it, there's a number of four-letter words in there and questionable morals and questionable situations. And some people might get after me for that, but I don't know. I grew up at a time when four-letter words were pretty common from about the age of 10 on. So I don't think I'm shocking anyone here except maybe some parents. I think the teenagers this will fit well with.
Fine. Yeah. I mean, what kid doesn't hear them? So yeah, and
Yeah,
especially a teenager. Yeah, no, we'll just like skip over that that will probably not shock the teens, and
no,
hopefully the parents will be like, okay, this is life. My kid's gonna hear it, even if they don't hear it
yeah,
from me.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
And sometimes very appropriate. I mean, some fantasy books do choose, or fantasy authors, I guess, do choose to use like made up curse words, but almost in every like human story, right? There's going to be a time when you're like, eh.
Yeah, there's going to be a time, and when you cut that down, there's two things there. One is because I've wrestled with that too. Why would they have the same curse words as us? It's like, well, why is the story told in English? They don't have English either, right? And so if you're leaning in and telling the story through English, then you might as well just use English words for the ease of the reader to understand some of those things, unless there's a curse or something that's specific to the culture that reveals something else about the place or the people. And so that's where I land on four-letter words being what they are. But when I think about crossing between young adult and adult fiction, I think the four-letter words are less destructive potentially or toxic potentially to the reader than themes. And I would say the themes in this one fit fully into that young adult category around sort of your moral code and questioning, some of the decisions you make, your relationship with your parents, found family, and ultimately where you land and coming out on, yeah, you might be a thief and you might not, like yourself, but maybe actually that's not who you are. And you're going to find this out as you go through, an adventure where life and death matters. And I think that is very much reflective of the transition from being a young adult to being an adult, if anybody's paying attention anyway.
Right. We all love those good coming of age stories, I think. I
Yeah,
do. And what point of view do you take here? Do you take Sis's point of view?
yeah, good question. Actually, both of them. And so one of the complexities in this book is it ratchets back and forth between Wincott's point of view and Sish's point of view. So there is very much sort of the father's point of view and his own reasons for, why he did what he did. And the story is told through there's the obvious journey through Rome towards the treasure and all the things that happen, but then also a series of flashbacks. And the flashbacks are told from each of their points of view too, and it traces their relationship from the time that sort of that relationship began until the time that it broke down, and each of their perspectives on it. And that I found to be a particularly useful device because it really made the story more character driven than plot driven. But it also, in a fun way for a writer like me, it allowed us to have little side quests from years before that these thieves had been exposed to. And so you get to see other parts of the world and other treasures and other funny little things aside from Roan, many of which actually do pop up again as they journey through Roan.
That's interesting because I was gonna ask if this dungeon, this isolated dungeon place, kind of limited you in, what you could explore. And I'm
Yeah.
imagining a one-room dungeon, but maybe that's not accurate either.
No, no. Roan is think of the mines of Moria in Lord of the Rings. It is a massive underground city. I won't give it all away, but think Journey to the Center of the Earth would be a good corollary for this. So you could quite easily set an entire novel just in Roan. But one of the things that I wanted to do, and maybe it was just me trying to keep my own interest as I wrote along, was to see other little bits and pieces of the world, and other little dungeon adventures and side quests and things that existed out there. Because the overworld, that is the world outside of Roan, is just as jam-packed full of monsters and dungeons and artifacts and treasure as the city is. And so I very much wanted to create a place that is full of magic, just brimming with magic and mystery, but not spend too much time explaining all of it. So, from a world building perspective, the world is fully fleshed out behind the scenes, but I'm only sharing the portions that, in my view, serve the story. So I think it's easy to say that a reader will come away from this, and my hope is they'll say, I actually really want to experience more of this world because I don't quite understand this or that, or what was the history of this? Where did that come from? So this is not a George R. R. Martin book where you get pages and pages and pages of lore and history and family, and no criticism of that at all. I don't have the skill to write that kind of story. But it is a world that we can continue to flesh out over time, as it serves the stories I want to tell in it.
Well, and that's my next question. Obviously, there's going to be another book here.
Yeah, yeah. So when I came up with the title, the idea in mind was to write a serialized number of these novels over time, and short stories too. There is already a short story out there that's set in the same world. It's called The Warrior's Task. It's in my second book, which is an anthology called It Came from the Trees and Other Violent Aberrations. So if somebody really likes the world of the Dungeoneers, you can visit it again in that short story of The Warrior's Task, but I will warn everybody, it is completely delinked. Takes place at the same time, but you wouldn't know it's in the same world necessarily, but it is. And yes, I have written the first chapter of what I think is the next book. And it explores different characters. So it takes place almost immediately after this one. But instead of telling it through the points of view of Sish and Wincott, it's telling it through some of the other Dungeoneers, namely Rena, Ren, and Terry the Barbarian, who are characters that are fun, but you don't really get to know that well in this first book. And so I wanted to have something want to have something that focuses a little more on them.
Fun. Yeah, it was interesting to me. You said, you're 12, you promised your 12-year-old self to write this book, but your previous works looked a little bit darker, hedging on horror. Which genre do you like better, or do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference, but what I found was when I got serious about learning to write fiction, and I've been writing for many, many years. I guess so I started writing when I was 12 and I started writing fantasy. And I just didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know how to create characters, didn't know how to create conflict. So I just spent a lot of time writing as a teenager. Excuse me. And then I went into journalism, and I was in journalism for a while, had a career in that, and then public relations and communications, and I got away from writing. And by the time I got into my 30s, I was in a different career and wanted to get back into writing fiction and started to focus on one-off stories, particularly short stories. And I would say equally to answer your question, do I have a preference? I'm equally a fan of horror as I am of fantasy. And where I found I was at in my life at that point in time was more interested in trying to understand horror as a genre, what made it tick, how does it work? And so I started writing short horror stories and then wrote a novella, and that became my first book, which is a slasher werewolf comedy. And then the second one that I mentioned earlier, the anthology, is mostly horror again, and same with my short fiction that's been published. But in the back of my mind, I've been picking away at fantasy for a while. I just couldn't find the story. I couldn't find the thing. And like I said at the very beginning, I had that image in my head of that individual, that thief who became Wingcock running up the side of the mountain. But it took years for me to really figure it out. In fact, there was a long period of time where I had like the first three chapters written and I couldn't actually figure out where to go from there. And I struggled and struggled and struggled and I kept hitting a wall. And then eventually I figured out I actually had to physically turn the characters around in Roan and send them in the other direction. And then I had the novel. Then it all happened. It all happened within like 2 months. It came out of my head. So it's true that I promised myself that I one day would be a novelist and I would write a fantasy novel because that's where my passion started as a kid. I wasn't reading horror when I was 12. I was reading fantasy as most of us, that's where you start. But I would say I'm equally passionate about both. And it just took me a little while longer to find the fantasy story in this. So now here I am, sort of balancing two worlds, and I won't say a master or even necessarily close to a master of either, probably an apprentice who's trying to figure it out, and hopefully we'll continue to keep pumping out content in both worlds.
Right. That's awesome because I find that like writing different things, satisfies different things about my brain. I don't know if like one feels more restful or natural to you, and then like, oh, I've done enough to these characters. Let me go do something good to these other characters.
Yeah, yeah, I find that too. I have found more recently in writing fantasy that it scratches my itch for the escape into an other world, a place of deep, rich history and fabric. And so when I was writing the Dungeoneers, what I really enjoyed about it was actually fleshing out that world and a bit of the history and the characters. And that scratches an itch for me as somebody who's passionate about history, frankly, and how you world build and then how you continue a story. And so fantasy to me, and the type of fantasy that I like to write, I think I definitely come up in that world of like Robert E. Howard and the Conan the Barbarian stories where you just assume you're going to serialize your work. Like you're not just going to write a one-off fantasy. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And so there's a commitment there to kind of, get it right, be in a place that you like to be, that you want to go back to, that you want to explore more. And I think the world of the Dungeoneers is that now for me. It took me a long time to get there. Whereas with horror, you can do one-off terrifying stories, right? Whether they're short, medium, or long. You can, get an idea that comes into your head and twist it around and say, well, that might make an interesting story. That might make an interesting long story. And then when you write it, you're done. You can walk away. You don't have to go back to that world. And I think those are my own boundaries that perhaps I've put on as a reader and a writer over the years, but that's how I divide them in my mind. And so, to your point, yeah, they scratch a different itch, each one of them, that I think is quite useful.
I was reading about Wolf at the Door, and it sounds like everybody's family dinner from hell turned real.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Wolf at the Door. Wolf at the Door is a novella. As I said before, it's a werewolf slasher horror comedy, and it was written during the very first phase of COVID when we were all in lockdown. And what was happening was I was running a business at that point in time, a public sector business, and had to decamp from our office, get everybody working remotely. It was a financial institution,
Oh.
and make that all sort of work. And because we were considered an essential service, had to keep it running, but I had to do it from a basement room in my house. And it was frustrating, and I had no outlet. None of us had an outlet in that first phase of COVID. And so I got this idea for a story of, I'm a big fan of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. And one of my favorite parts, if not my whole favorite part of that novel, is the dinner, where like everything just goes to heck, right? And I thought that would be great. But what would happen if you got a bunch of people together, exactly like that? You had dinner go completely off the rails, and then werewolves show up and start hacking into everybody. And then what happens? And so that was the question that was on my mind. And as a writer, what I was trying to hone was conflict. So when I created that, it's kind of like an ensemble cast. There's far too many points of view for a novel or a novella of its size, but it works. It somehow works. And what I did was I actually drew out the dining room table and I made a seating plan. And the seating plan was I'm going to put each person with the worst possible person they could sit beside at this dinner for it to go sideways. And so I actually planned out a seating chart for where all these people would be, so they'd be next to the person that would inevitably result in a fight. And it's a two-act story. It's the first is the dinner, and then the second is the survival horror. And I think, as one of the broader themes I was trying to unpack in my mind at that point in time during COVID is what happens to people when they go from first world problems to real world problems, and what do you turn into? And so by the end of that novella, there is the way the ending plays out. There's this open-ended question of who's really the monster, or have they themselves become monsters in order to survive what has occurred overnight? And have they resolved any of their issues, or things getting worse? And that was very, very purposeful around it. But it is told through humor, ridiculousness, and like that tone that you would get through like a National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. The difference being is I picked Thanksgiving, because in Canada, Thanksgiving is in October, and that just seemed to me to be perfect for October, horror, Halloween, dinner, werewolves. I was like, okay, if you had a full moon on an October Thanksgiving in Canada, here we are. And that's ultimately what happened.
I love it. I'm just picturing the little old lady, the grandma, becoming the scariest one of all.
Yeah, there's definitely some people who show up in interesting ways. I will say that I think it's probably no surprise, but the mother of the main core family is truly the heroine in the whole thing. She's the one who does not mess around. She knows exactly what she's doing. Her husband is super solid. And I don't know if it was intended, but when I look back on that book now, um, it's actually a really good example of a very functional partnership and marriage, in those two main characters, right? So they actually don't come apart at the seams, not really, but everybody else around them does, and that's a bit like National Lampoon's too, actually.
Yeah, it's the mom and the dad magic, right?
Yeah, it's the mom and dad magic, right? Like they know everything's coming apart at them. Maybe they don't like each other in this moment, but they also realize it's their house, it's their family. They have to save the holiday, right? So how do you save the holiday? Well, you got to survive it.
Yeah, the werewolves and silver and all of those tropes, right?
Yeah, yeah, you got it.
Super fun. Well, I'm so glad you're here today, Joel McKay, fantasy and horror author. Where can we find you and your books?
You can find me on my website, so www.joelmckay.ca. And then on socials, author_Joel_McKay on Instagram and Threads is a really good place to connect with me. Shoot me a message, comment. And then if you want to get my stuff, Amazon's the best place to order, ebook or paperback worldwide. And then Ingram as well. So it's available through libraries, available in bookstores. And if you happen to be in beautiful Prince George or Cornell here in the central interior, you can go to Books and Company and you can get my stuff there too.
Oh, fun. We love small bookstores.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have a title for your next Dungeoneers book?
The working title which will probably change, so nobody can hold me to this, is the Dungeoneers and the Summoner's Crown.
Summoner's Crown. Ooh, I like that, crowns.
Yeah.
Fun. Well, I hope you will come back once you have that out and tell us all about it, and keep working at the magic.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Tricia. It was
Thank
great
you.
to chat.
Bye, Joel.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.